MapDad here, celebrating the end of 2024 and the start of 2025 with another father-son adventure. Heading overseas to England, but London would not be the final destination. From Heathrow Airport, a rental car pickup, and a drive with friends just under 4 hours to the northwest to the city of Liverpool. Why? Home to the Beatles, the Fab Four. MapDad, a huge fan. So much so that the guest bathroom in his house has framed albums and a crocheted kind of art piece from the Sgt. Pepper era. So, yeah, I was excited. But driving on the other side of the road, MapDad nicked a few curbs at first, making some turns, but once out on the motorway, was in better shape. Arriving midday in Liverpool, checked into the Hard Day's Night Hotel, with the Beatles theme, of course, a splurge on the John Lennon suite, because why not have a piano in the room? The suite, £500 a night. So with the exchange rate at around 80 cents per pound, the room was about $600. Nice for the space and a great location. Not sure it was worth that much money. First lunch was at a Thomas Frost, a chain kind of like an American diner in that you can get anything and it's all kind of okay. Now, Map's son is a huge fan of the Premier League, so that would be a big part of this trip. His favorite team, Everton. So we took a tour of Goodison Park this first afternoon. The park is in its final year hosting matches, so we liked seeing the locker rooms and heading out onto the pitch. You also get to see the media rooms and the visitors' locker room on this 90-minute tour. £25 a person. I had to reach out directly to the box office weeks in advance as I had problems buying those tickets online. Before the tour, we tracked down the tower from the 1780s, which was the old lockup that sits on the Everton crest. It's also known as Prince Rupert's Tower. After the tour, a walk down Bold Street, which is home to a host of restaurants. We ended up at Cassip Meat House. I had a barbecue sliced sirloin, and that was pretty good. Saturday would start the Beatles part of the trip, and we took the Magical Mystery Tour bus, a 2-hour guided tour that I would highly recommend for any Beatles fan. There were stops at Penny Lane and Strawberry Field, which I didn't know is a job training facility for those with mild to moderate disabilities. We also stopped by the house where George Harrison lived and where Paul McCartney grew up, and you can see the modest beginnings for some of the world's biggest musicians. Now, part of the £26 cost for the Magical Mystery Tour gets you in free to one of the places where the Beatles cut their chops, the Cavern Club. In the middle of the day, people were drinking and having a great time. So imagine being packed in here like sardines on a night the Beatles were performing in the early 1960s. Now, there are 2 museums dedicated to the Beatles' story in Liverpool. There is the Liverpool Beatles Museum, which is on Matthews Street, just down from the Cavern Club. It's owned by the family of Pete Best, who was the drummer before he got kicked out and replaced by Ringo Starr. There's a very cool collection of early Beatle memorabilia, like Paul's microphone and Pete Best's drum set, and a story of Pete's mother, who owned a bar where the band played well before the Cavern Club. Now, there's also the first known film of the band, £17 admission here. The other museum is the Beatles story. It's down on the waterfront where many other city museums and hotels are located. £20 to get in. There's about an hour-long audio tour, which is suited more toward introducing people to the band, as opposed to those familiar with its history. One thing I found interesting is both museums had uniform replicas from the Sgt. Pepper era. I think the actual outfits are with the surviving Beatles. It's also funny that the Liverpool Beatles Museum has on display glasses that it says John Lennon wore, but they weren't his glasses. He borrowed Pete Best's grandmother's glasses. Now, the Beatles story ends with a room that has John Lennon's actual glasses in it. Now, as a Beatles fan, I enjoyed both museums, but for my money, the best thing was the Magical Mystery Tour. If you get the old Scouser Tony, you are in for a very fun ride. There's also a statue down at the waterfront of the Fab Four. I didn't want to wait in line to get a photo. Reminds me of the Rocky statue in Philadelphia, where there's always a line. As for the weather, let's just say even though the Beatles sang "Here Comes the Sun," we kept waiting and it didn't come. Dinner on the second night in Liverpool was Turkish barbecue at a place called Elif. There are a handful of them around the city. It was quite good. Our friends took on what I can only best describe as a meat platter for two. The restaurant was in an old bank building, and we had the advantage of being Americans who eat dinner much earlier than the Europeans, as the place filled up quickly after we sat down with a long wait list. For a nightcap, we hit the oldest pub in Liverpool. Best name, I thought. Ye Hole and Ye Wall. Dates back to 1726. MapDad drinks very few pints, but he likes his whiskey. And so I enjoyed a Jameson and ginger. On our last afternoon, it was back to Goodison Park to see a Prem game in person. Now, as of this video, Everton was barely out of the relegation zone, which is when the bottom three teams in the 20-team league go down a division at the end of the year. Everton was taking on a Nottingham Forest team that was in the top four, someplace it hadn't been in decades. An early goal for the visitors took the wind out of Everton's sails. They went down to defeat 2-0 at home. Could have been worse if not for a few great saves by Jordan Pickford, England's #1 goalkeeper. So the mood on the drive back to Heathrow to drop off the rental may have been a little somber, but with a new stadium for Everton opening next year, there's an excuse to come back and party with the Liverpudlians sometime again in the future. Don't miss part 2 of the England trip. For now, I'm MapDad, pointing your travels in the right direction.